Films in Focus with David Sterritt is underwritten by The Movie House, your destination for first-run Hollywood and independent movies, and a digital portal to the Met Opera, National Theater Live, and special events worldwide in Millerton, New York, and on the web, themoviehouse.net.
David Sterritt is the editor-in-chief of the Quarterly Review of Film and Video, contributing writer at Cineast, film professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art, and Robin Hood Radio's very own critic and guide to all things cinematic. He joins us weekly, which is perfect because this is right in his wheelhouse. This is our favorite end of year, the best movies of 2022 or 2022. Hi, David. How are you?
Doing okay, Joe. How are you doing?
Ready?
That sounds manageable. Yeah, no, it is that time of year again. It is the end of the year, and therefore time to come up with the traditional 10 best list. And I've actually snuck 11 movies onto my 10 best list because it was not a great year for movies, but it was not a terrible year either. So anyway, I would like to celebrate some of the best movies of the year. And I want to say right away that most of these films are not movies that play in multiplexes everywhere. But in this wonderful age of streaming cinema, people can find most of these movies if they just look around for them a little bit, and I recommend them all. They are good films. So let's begin with a documentary, a movie called 3 Minutes, A Lengthening. And this was directed by Bianca Stigter, and it is actually a movie about a movie. Back in 1938, a man was traveling in Poland, and he shot some 16mm home movie footage in a town with a large Jewish population. And decades later, his grandson came upon this footage, which has since then been reproduced in a book, and now it has been kind of dissected and re-edited into this movie called 3 Minutes, A Lengthening, because the original 16mm home movie footage is about 3 minutes, but now it has been stretched out, and we see certain bits of the footage over and over again, and frames are frozen so we can examine them, and all of this going on while a narration is explaining the material to us. And what's going on in this movie is that original film is being scrutinized for clues to the people, places, and things that were captured by this little camera back in the late 1930s, and most of the people who we see in that home movie footage died soon afterward in the Treblinka death camp. And this movie pays tribute to their memory and to their whole way of life. And there have been many, many, many Holocaust documentaries made. This one is a truly marvelous one, and I really recommend it. It's an utterly serious film, obviously, also a very moving film. 3 Minutes, A Lengthening. Good piece of work, very fine addition to the great body of work of Holocaust documentaries. Next, something completely different, an Australian film called Nitram, which is the name Martin spelled backwards. This is directed by Justin Kurzel, and we just meet this young main character, and we start to realize that he is a loser and a loner, and he is not very happy, and he seems to be leading a sort of a miserable life. And little by little, we realize that all this is building up to something, and what it turns out to be building up to is a true life tragedy that happened in 1996 in Australia, in Tasmania actually, called the Port Arthur Massacre. This was a mass shooting in Tasmania, and it led ultimately to a radical overhaul of the gun laws of Australia. And what we have here is this fictionalized, but I think fairly faithful to the facts, account of what led up to that horrible massacre. Judy Davis and Anthony LaPaglia play the main character's parents, but the main character himself is played by Caleb Landry Jones. It's a terrific performance, and in an age when we are still so much troubled by gun violence in America and elsewhere, this is a movie which really calls very needed attention to that problem. And it's also just a beautifully made movie. Next of all, I'd like to mention an American movie called They're There, directed by Andrew Bujalski. Bujalski specializes in small-scale cinema, and here he made a movie that seems almost like a stunt. The movie was made during the pandemic, and the director the cinematographer, and the performers were all in completely different places doing their jobs on this coordinated schedule. And so what we have here is basically a series of dialogues among different people with musical interludes in between them. And the cast is wonderful, and it's just a quirky, odd little talky movie, which I enjoyed very much. The cast includes Lily Taylor and Lenny James and Jason Schwartzman, and it's just a really, really good little tiny movie that I really enjoyed. Next of all, a movie which is a little bit less tiny, but still very modest, The Eternal Daughter, directed by Joanna Hogue. She has a devoted following, but for me, this is the first of her movies that really succeeds almost completely, and a lot of the credit for that goes to Tilda Swinton, who is an asset to any movie, and in this case, she's a double asset since Tilda Swinton plays two roles here. She plays a filmmaker preparing a new project while visiting a home which used to be her family's home a long time ago with her aging mother, and the mother is also played by Tilda Swinton. We only see the mother and daughter in the same shot twice in the entire movie. So it's an odd sort of a film in that way, but it's a fascinating portrait of these two people, a middle-aged filmmaker and her aging mother, and the atmosphere is very moody. The narrative is very enigmatic and mysterious. It moves slowly, but it is just a gorgeous, enveloping film that just held me every step of the way. It's a kind of a ghost story, but a very unconventional one, and I really, really recommend it, The Eternal Daughter by Joanna Hogue. Next of all, a movie that got a bit more play, Tar, directed by Todd Field. Not everybody liked this movie. Not everybody liked any of the movies on my list. People don't agree on movies very often. In the case of Tar, there were many people who attacked it. They called it pretentious or dull or even homophobic. But for me, it's a movie about high culture that actually honors the intelligence of its audience. The main character, whose last name is Tar, is a gay orchestra conductor, and she is played beautifully by Cate Blanchett. And we find out as the movie proceeds that this woman has been involved in various controversies. She's a hugely celebrated, world-famous conductor. She also has apparently, possibly been involved in some sort of sexual harassment earlier on, and this is lingering and sort of echoing throughout the movie. The action moves at, I would call, a brisk allegro. The last movement gets a little bit muddled, but most of it is a very, very engaging and, again, very serious sort of high culture movie with a fabulous performance by Cate Blanchett as an unusual and intriguing main character. The next movie I would like to mention is another American movie, We're All Going to the World's Fair, directed by Jane Schoenbrunn. And here we have a claustrophobic horror film, which is very much about the claustrophobic atmosphere of the horrible coronavirus pandemic. And here we have a young woman who, at the beginning of the movie, performs an odd ritual to enter a mysterious computer game where apparently the people who participate in this computer game undergo strange and maybe life-altering changes. And so we have this young woman who now enters this cyberspace, and yes, changes start to happen to her, and that is what the subject of this movie is. There's also another character, an anonymous stranger, who contacts her by video, and then there's other people who send evidence of the changes that the game has brought to them, and it's just a weird, creepy, fascinating little horror movie. Highly recommended if you like horror movies. Also a very interesting comment on the spooky ambiance of the whole coronavirus pandemic period, which of course isn't quite over yet. Next of all Quiet on the Western Front. Here we have a German-language remake of a fabulous Hollywood movie from 1930 called All Quiet on the Western Front, which itself is based on a very great novel published in the late 20s by the novelist Erich Maria Remarque. And this is just a movie that depicts the horrors of war and the follies of nationalism. And that's what it is. It's basically a pacifist novel that has now been made into a couple of terrific pacifist films. I totally recommend the Hollywood movie from 1930. It's a masterpiece. And now this new version of All Quiet on the Western Front, again, a very powerful and relevant message for our time. A pacifist movie that depicts the horrors of war in very pungent ways. Just a really impressive epic of a movie. Next of all, Playground, a Belgian movie. The original title is Un Monde, which means a world. And here we have a movie which takes place partly on the playground of a school, and it is, as the French title, A World, suggests. It's a microcosm of human society in general. We have a couple of kids who are the main characters, a little girl and her older brother. The older brother gets bullied in the schoolyard. The girl tries to protect him. She's not very successful. Their father tries to intercede, but also not very effectively. And we have this movie which is shot in a very close-in camera style. The camera just hovers immediately in the proximity of these various characters as the story proceeds. It's a very intense movie. These young kids, these little kids, give performances that any grown-up actor could be proud of. It's a fascinating movie with a really, just a terrific and harrowing portrait of what life can be like when you're a young kid on the playground and things are not going your way. And again, all of this is a metaphor for the world that all of us grown-ups actually live in. A really remarkable cinematic achievement and a very moving human drama. Now we move into the top three, Jill. And this is one that surprised me to end up way high on my list, but I think maybe it's a sign of the times we live in, a movie called Ted K., an American movie directed by Tony Stone. Here we have a movie about Theodore Kaczynski, better known as the Unabomber. He was the mad assassin who sent explosive packages to people who he felt were responsible for the ills of the contemporary world. And he also detailed his philosophy of life in a tract that eventually gained wide circulation. So, this movie does not focus primarily on Kaczynski's acts of violence. Rather, it shows mostly his solitary life in an isolated cabin in Montana as he engineers his awful explosives and broods over changes in the natural world around him. It's just a superbly filmed movie, an amazing performance of the main character by an actor named Charlotte Copley, and the music is superb, absolutely beautifully chosen, beautifully performed. The cinematography is stunning. The acting is terrific. And again, it's not a pleasant movie in a lot of ways. It's a movie about the Unabomber, but these are the times we live in, and this is a beautiful expression of it, a really harrowing and in its own way gorgeous movie. The number two movie on my list, Jill, is an Iranian movie called No Bears. And we hear so much bad stuff about Iran in the news these days, and we have for so many years now. It's wonderful to remember that there is a spectacular tradition of artful filmmaking in Iran. One of the greatest of all of the modern Iranian filmmakers is Jafar Panahi, and this is his most recent film, again called No Bears, and it is a masterpiece. I cannot recommend it highly enough. Panahi has been feuding with the Iranian government for a very, very long time. And a few months before this film came out in 2022, he was arrested and ordered to serve a 6-year prison term for what the government called propaganda against the system. Yet, throughout all of these recent years of harassment of him by the Iranian government, he has continued to work and make movies and get those movies out into the world despite all of these bans by the government. And No Bears is just about as good as anything he's ever made. The main character is a semi-fictional version of Panahi himself, played by Panahi himself, and he is using online communications to direct a movie in a village near the Turkish border. And there he gets involved in a dispute involving a photograph he casually took of a young couple who he saw walking down the street. It is a witty drama, it is a suspenseful drama, and it's a marvelous allegorical film about the xenophobia, suspicion, and fear in Iran today and also in our own society as well. It's a marvelous film, one of the absolute best of 2022. No Bears by Jafar Panahi. And finally, Jill, the movie which I ultimately found the best of 2022, a French film called One Fine Morning, Un Bon Matin. Here we have Léa Seydoux playing a young woman who has an array of challenges, none of which are exotic, all of which are all too common in ordinary lives. Her father has a degenerative disease that has ruined his eyesight and is now ruining his mind. Her mother is losing patience with that husband from whom she has long been estranged. Her boyfriend is married and not sure whether he wants to really make a new commitment to her. She has her own husband died not long ago, very, very young, tragically young, and his memories often intrude on her thoughts. Plus, she has a job. She's an interpreter, and she also has a young child who she's raising by herself. None of this is all that original in terms of content, but the movie is just so beautifully directed, and it presents such a fine and nuanced portrait of this young woman facing all of these all too ordinary challenges. Léa Seydoux gives a superb performance as the main character, and the movie, which was directed by Mia Hansen-Løve, is just gorgeously directed. It's just beautifully done. Again, a truly human and humanistic drama, which I really, really, really loved. So those are the 10 best films of the year for me, Jill, and I just want to mention again the titles of the top 3, and I'm sure people can find them if they look around the streaming platforms or into their own movie theaters. Ted K, No Bears, and One Fine Morning. 3 very different movies, but for me, the best ones of 2022. So that is my praising the movie story this week, Jill.
For which we thank you as always and appreciate you and this, David Sterritt, Films in Focus. This is the best movies of 2022.